Okay, so what is the function of martial arts in modern times? Well, yeah, that's a good question, huh? There's a lot of disagreement and what have you around martial arts, which we touched on in the question of Tai Chi and Fajin. Martial arts are an odd beast, huh? I think especially they can be difficult for people to understand just how they fit into the wider path of spirituality. I mean, especially as these traditions are based around Taoism and Buddhism quite often, which obviously discuss a very peaceful, non-violent path. And then, of course, you have these arts that on their surface appear to be very, very violence-based. You know, they're looking at the art of combat and life and death struggle. It can be hard to see how they fit into the wider picture of these traditions. I think, for me, the thing to remember is that martial arts really can be divided into three main categories. And we need to understand what category of martial art we're studying and why, what the purposes of these different categories of martial arts are. The first category, it would be wartime martial arts. You know, I mean, at a time when people are fighting for their life on a daily basis in a war zone. Those kind of martial arts obviously are pretty much devoid from any kind of deeper spiritual meaning for obvious purposes. They're looking at the practical aspect of survival, and these arts are based around sort of, you know, gouging eyes and how to kill a person as quick as you possibly can. Obviously those kind of martial arts will be emphasize a lot of weapons training as well, and a lot of very sort of brutal techniques. Second category of martial arts really is sports martial arts, competitive martial arts. This is something like obviously MMA or boxing, or well, Chinese martial arts, anything taken to that sort of level where you're competing against generally one other person, you know, to win a match. These have a very different mindset. Obviously, they have a set of rules in place. You don't generally want to remove somebody's eye from its socket during a sporting event. That would be considered unsporting. And you don't generally want to kill the person, but you do train to become very, very obviously efficient at damaging another person. As much as anything, those martial arts as well, you have to develop a lot of body resilience because you're going to be taking a lot of damage. So a lot of those matches, I mean, a lot of the times it's who can take the most punishment is a major factor in all of those kind of things, yeah. There's obviously crossovers between wartime martial arts and sports martial arts. Obviously there's a certain toughness, there's a mindset to it. There's obviously a different level of brutality involved, of course. The martial art is adjusted for its setting. We then have a third style of martial arts, which is what I call peacetime martial arts, which essentially is what most people these days should be practicing, in my opinion. Peacetime martial arts are martial arts for people that are not fighting for their life on a daily basis. I mean, I can safely say where I live in this comfortable town and the other places I visit, I'm not in much danger of being attacked and somebody trying to kill me. Of course, it's a small risk. Everybody can face this, but it's highly unlikely. I would say most people who I teach are in a similar situation. I don't get many people that are coming to train with me that are being attacked with knives on a daily basis or anything like this. What this means is that the focus of the martial arts should change. I mean, it's just a case of practicality. I mean, in life, you should, if martial arts, okay, so we're talking martial arts. Martial arts does have a slightly combative mindset to it. Ultimately, you should train to combat the biggest threat to your life. I mean, it's just logical. If you live in a peaceful time, take me for example, I'm more likely to die from cancer or heart disease or liver failure or, I don't know, degenerative health over the course of my life than I am to die from somebody stabbing me. Statistically, it's far more likely, and I would say most people watching this would probably be in a similar situation. So therefore, I train to combat the biggest threat. So ultimately, that would mean the most important focus for my training should be my health. My health is obviously on a physical level first, which martial arts are marvelous if trained properly for looking after your physical health. If they're trained badly, they can be quite damaging for it, but they're very good at looking after physical health. And then the other thing that's a major opponent to almost all of us on a daily basis is our own mind, and the quality of our thought patterns. I mean, this was the basis of much of Buddhism, Taoism and other Eastern traditions. So therefore, this is where the sort of concept came from in martial arts, that we're ultimately training to overcome ourselves, which was not really a factor during wartime, right? It was about survival, but during peacetime, this was a much more important part of the practice. So, that doesn't mean that the arts have to become wishy-washy. Definitely not. That really shouldn't be the case. It is a martial art, and you're training for efficiency of what you're doing. So even though I teach peacetime martial arts with an emphasis upon health and developing the mind in the right way, so that it's not an enemy or anything like this, people should still learn how to defend themselves to a certain extent. They still learn to efficiently strike, lock, throw, combat another person, and how to deal with the emotional and psychological stress of dealing with an aggressor. I mean, if you can deal with an aggressor in a calm and centered fashion with complete confidence while you're dealing with that person, then ultimately that skill carries across into the rest of your life, because very few things in life will ever be as stressful as dealing with raw aggression from another person. So although we're not training to kill each other, definitely not. I've never taught a student how to jab someone in the eye or crush a throat or anything like this. It just seems a little out of place for the times we live in. But I do train people in combat as much as anything, so they can learn to overcome their own stress. I mean, that's really where the focus of peacetime martial arts should lay. Practical, efficient, but not with an over-focus on a sort of obsession with we could die at any second from somewhere in the street. You've got to remember that, like, when you're training martial arts, one of the greatest things that happens is a merging of the mind and the body, right? I mean, anybody who's trained anything for a short space of time will realize that. I mean, this is ignoring the internal mechanics of Tai Chi versus the external mechanics of Wing Chun, or I don't know, whatever. Ignore all of that technical shit. Just throw it out the window. Even the basis of martial arts is the integration of mind and body. As soon as I'm moving with a constant awareness of what I'm doing, then my mind and my body will integrate. What that means is then whatever you train with your body and train with your practice will then become a part of your mind. So and I see this all the time, if I'm constantly training with that paranoia, you know it, you've seen those kind of martial arts schools, haven't you, which are quite different from mine, by the way, where it's like, everything should be treated like there's an aggressor around every corner. At any moment you could die. Treat every situation like a life or death. It's such an unhealthy mindset. All of the time training this way will build that mental tension into the body until ultimately what you become is paranoid. And you'll see this, the men in their 60s and what have you still harping on about the good old days when they kill a man over an argument in a bar or some shit, I don't know. But this constant adrenaline-based adrenal fear that they're in. They're putting themselves into a sort of fight or flight mode constantly. It's not good for them. And ultimately, those people will get sick. I mean, I started martial arts as a very, very small child, and many of the martial arts I remember from back in those days, early 80s, nobody really understood the deeper spiritual aspects of martial arts. Everybody was just trying to kick each other as hard as they could, And a lot of those people I remember who trained, if they didn't adapt and evolve towards a deeper spiritual understanding of their art, most of them just ended up burning out their adrenals and then eventually suffering from problems with their liver and their joints and their tendons, which if you understand Chinese medicine correspondence, you'll understand why that happens. So ultimately their martial arts defeated them, which makes it the worst martial art ever, really. So, yeah, you should train for the times you live in. The other side to that, I suppose, because as you've probably figured out if you've listened to any of these, I like to argue with myself, is you can't say I just train martial arts for peace, so I just do forms or something like that. I just do Tai Chi forms and I don't study anything else. That's not the case. Life is full of pressures. Everyone's pressuring you all the time. Pressures can range from money, finances, partner, practicalities, societal pressures on you, what you think about it. It's just stressful, your work, all these things impacting people all the time. And as we know, stress is the biggest killer. Now, in order to deal with the stress, you have to learn to be calm and centered in the face of that. So martial arts is one way of doing this. You're not going to get this level of calm and centeredness just by doing your forms practice and putting the mind into the body. You have to put your body under stress at certain times, and that stress within martial arts is done within partner work. So all of the time while we're practicing these martial arts under this state of stress, what we're learning to do is to stay calm and keep our body out of that fight or flight mode while we're training. That means that when you go out into the rest of your life, you can confront it and stay calm and centered no matter what life throws at you, the difficulties that may come your way. That to me is the biggest reason for martial arts in modern times. You know, not to become a paranoid, like competitive type that somebody could kill you at any second, but to be calm and centered in the face of adversity. You know, that's the ultimate aim of peacetime martial arts, so your mind and your body stay healthy. You know. How does Feng Shui fit into these practices? Okay, that question's probably come because people have seen I've done some writings on Feng Shui. So Feng Shui, for those who don't know, it literally means wind and water. I'm sure most people are familiar with what it is. It's the art of time and placement, if you like, organizing and understanding the natural way that energy flows within the environment. This can be the energy within the external environment. Oh, you can't see what I'm pointing. There's a window here, by the way. I'm pointing to the outside world. This can be the external environment, or it can be the internal environment of your house, where you live or work or treat or train. You know, those generally the things they're looking at. Feng Shui was originally, take it right back to its roots, was about where to place houses in relationship to graveyards. It sounds strange, I know, to a lot of people, but it was a big deal back in sort of ancient China with their belief systems of spirits, the spirit world still being intimately connected to our world. So they didn't want to build houses or living anywhere where people lived in a place that was lined up in the wrong fashion with a graveyard, so that the spirits would invade the house. And that's where it developed. And then gradually, from here, it got more and more complex and intricate. They started to understand how energy affected a space and how it can move in a space and how that affected people. So Feng Shui really is about that. It's about how to arrange your spaces that you're in and understand the environment to understand how they will impact upon your natural health. This can sound strange, it might seem woolly to people at first, but really it's not. I mean, Feng Shui is based upon two principles. One is a series of sort of energetic fields within a space. That's not that weird. I mean, really, when you think about it, I mean, there's electromagnetic fields giving off by many, many things. We already understand scientifically that electromagnetism affects the human body. So there's that component to it. How to line everything up so those fields are beneficial to our health. The second aspect to this is ultimately how our mind interacts with the space. So, I mean, this is to do with consciousness. This is often a bit that's overlooked in Feng Shui books, weirdly, which is a major part of Feng Shui. If I go into a space, the first thing that happens is my vision fills that space, right? It fills up this area of the room. And my mind interacts with whatever room I walk into. So take a really easy example. If I have a 45-degree cutting line like this in the room, say you've got a black roof beam or something, like an old English cottage or something with a 45-degree cutting line to your right of your vision when I walk into the room. Yeah. As soon as I walk into that room, whether I want to or not, that cutting line is picked up by my subconsciousness, by my vision, my peripheral vision, is taken into my body, and that has an impact upon the way that my chi is reacting. It's just the same as if you saw, you watch a horror film and there's a horrible jumpy scene on it, it's going to have an impact upon your chi, and that's what will happen. In the same way, when I go into a space, there's going to be a subtle reactions taking place within my mind according to what I see primarily that will affect the inside of my body. In the short term, that doesn't do anything, not really, it's nothing major, but in the long term, what we'll do, if you keep going into the same space and keep seeing that same thing, it will start to almost carve an impact upon the way that your chi moves within the body. So they understood within ancient China that the different parts of your vision correspond to different parts of your brain patterning. The right side of your body is yin, left side is yang, not what most people would think of, but right side is yin, left side is yang. They always arrange the way a space should be set up from the door when you walk in, within an interior space anyway, right? So why they do that is because when I walk into the mouth of the room through the door, my vision perceives all these different areas. These correspond to different parts of my brain, different parts of my energetic system, different parts of yin and yang, and these will impact my body. through Feng Shui, they understood how to rearrange objects and patterns within this space so that it caused my qi to move in the healthiest fashion, so that my mind wasn't disturbed, so that the yang side of my body could have qi that would flourish, and the yin side of my body would have qi that sunk and established itself low down within the body, and the body wasn't stressed. When these patterns were organized in the right way, then the organs would harmonize with each other. So then in a way, Feng Shui was a method of turning your living space into a kind of Chinese medicine, so that the body could be treated. They then took this further, sorry, I'm supposed to keep this brief on Feng Shui, and looked at all the different aspects of your life, including how you dealt with business and sociability and things like this. Different parts of your perception, your peripheral vision would absorb this and the way your body interacted with the space, and then govern how your mind dealt with these facets of your life. So then they could tailor the space you were in to start to exaggerate or emphasize certain parts of your thinking. This is why businesses started to absorb Feng Shui so much as well. And then obviously it got used in a disempowering way. So sometimes you go into Asian buildings, like banks and businesses, they'll often have a Feng Shui established if you know what you're looking at or know what you're feeling when you walk into space, so that the customer or the person who's coming into that business will often feel very, very disempowered in comparison to the person who's sitting there, who's building it. It's all very interesting. It's like a form of subconscious psychology, combined with energetics of sort of macrocosmic qigong, qigong of the environment. Very clever, very, very clever. It's very interesting, and the reason it fits into these practices, to get back to the question, is because everything within your life, if you're going to absorb Taoism as a lifestyle, wants to match, right? So it's no good being supremely centered and ordered in the way you present yourself and the way you do things, but your house is a mess on a really simple level. Because your living space is a reflection of you, and you are a reflection of the energy of your living space, so that the two should match with one another. A lot of the time when I teach the basics of Feng Shui to my students, it's about how to organize their house so it's more beneficial for their training, and how to organize their training spaces. A lot of my students have a room in their house that they use solely for practice, and how to establish this so that it is most beneficial to what they do, so that already that living space becomes a tool to settle in their qi. So it's a highly useful part of the training. There's several additions to my practice that I've studied like this. I did I Ching and Feng Shui and astrology, astronomy, and things like this as part of the Taoist practice. Initially, when I learned them, I never found them very interesting. I was quite young when I first encountered them. When you're 14 and you just want to learn martial arts, the last thing you care about is where your sofa's going to go. I didn't care. But gradually over time, started to understand them a bit more, and they've become a more major part of what I do. Even in my Chinese medicine treatments, sometimes I treat people, and a few times I've asked for photos of their living spaces because I've had long-term chronic illnesses, and often you'll find long-term unexplained chronic illnesses, say they've got something wrong with their kidneys, for example, that nobody can really understand why. If you look at their living space, often it's quite funny, it's almost textbook of a living space that would destroy the kidney's health. It would set up a particular energetic patterning in the body that would negatively impact what they're doing. So on that level, you can make changes to somebody's space, and it will help their health as well. What is the Dan Tian? Okay, well, I'm assuming from this question, we're talking about the lower Dan Tian. Generally, if they don't specify which Dan Tian, they normally mean the lower Dan Tian. The lower Dan Tian as well, I should add, is more complex than that, because the location will vary from tradition to tradition. So more alchemical traditions would actually say the perineum is the lower dantian, because it's a conversion place for Jing. Whereas Qigong-based traditions would often say that the abdomen is the lower dantian, and more specifically an area just in and down from the navel. So the dantian is a term taken from very high-end practice, because it literally means the field of the elixir. The place, field, the tian, the field, they're talking about farming fields, not like an electrical field. So they're indicating it's a place that needs to be cultivated, and eventually it will lead to the dan, the elixir, the high-level energetic substance that we can build inside the body that can supposedly lead a person towards immortality within Taoism. So, quite a high-ended aim, yeah? So, essentially, leaving the high-end attainment of the elixir aside, the Dan Tian is a physical and energetic center for the body. So within Qigong practice is a place where initially the Qi must be sunk to and then mobilized from, which I guess essentially is the same for Tai Chi as well, although the mechanisms are a little different. And then beyond here, later stages involve actually developing the Qi to such a high level that the physical components of the Dan Tian start to form, which essentially means the soft tissues in the lower abdomen, the Huang, start to reshape themselves in a spherical fashion, which gives you the vessel of the Dan Tian. Then eventually Qi at very, very high stages can be built up and stored within that area like a battery. Oftentimes in traditions, classically, they didn't talk about storing Qi in the Dan Tian for a very, very long time. You see, you won't see that written about in many of the sort of old writings or anything. That was more of an inner or hidden practice to store Qi in the Dan Tian. More it was used as a place to convert substances and move it through the body. The reason they didn't talk about storing Qi in the Dan Tian was because it can be dangerous. If the channel system is not open and Qi is pushed into the Dan Tian, then it can cause quite severe health problems. Nowadays that situation has changed. People have started talking about filling the Dan Tian openly, so it's no longer hidden anymore, but oftentimes the methods for doing so are missing. I would say with regards to the Dan Tian, forget filling for a really long time. First thing to worry about is sinking the Qi to that area and learning to get your mind to interact with the Dan Tian in the right fashion. The Dan Tian is quite interesting with what it does to your mind, because you always have a location of your awareness, yeah? And for most people, a location is up in their head. And if the location is up in the head, then generally your mind will be very cerebral, very intellectual. When the mind sinks down to the lower Dan Tian, then it tends to stabilize and become more centered, and then gradually Qi will start to build up in that area and circulate away from the Dan Tian around the channel system. They talked about that Dan Tian being like a wheel that pushed water through the channels. So essentially it's a driving force for everything inside the body. The Dan Tian is important because in Qigong, if you cannot find the Dan Tian and get it to function on a basic level, then you're kind of stuck, you know. It's like getting the keys in the ignition. We need the Dan Tian to work. For Tai Chi, it's the same. The Qi must be sunk there and then mobilized in order for the Jin to manifest. So a lot of people are held back in their Tai Chi because they cannot find or work with the lower Dan Tian. Alchemy, the same. We need to find it because it's a conversion place for substances within the body. You should find that almost all authentic Qigong or internal systems for a really long time are concerned with developing the Dan Tian in the right way, because it's the basis for everything that you do. In contrast to that, once the Dan Tian work is finished, it's time to move on. There is a point in your training where you can work too much with the Dan Tian. You've reached the level where it's time to move on. And if you don't, then it can actually start to cause stagnation in the body as well. So there's a whole level of timing around that Dan Tian, which really will come down to your teacher to tell you when to move on. Okay, the next question is, I see in your writings you don't spend a lot of time talking about the imagination or visualization. Why is this? Okay, that's true. Yeah, I mean, what the question's referring to, I guess, is if you look at many systems out there, many Qigong systems, the instructions are often to visualize or imagine something. So imagine a white light above your head, or imagine a blue light moving out of your kidneys and filling the space around you. And sometimes those visualizations get quite intricate, like imagine a deity above you, or imagine 4 mystical animals moving through your channel system, or something. It gets very complicated, very intricate. So what you end up with is a system of people sitting there imagining things taking place. I don't use any of that in my practice at all, for the simple reason that I've had a number of Qigong and Nei Gong teachers, and all of the ones that were good, you know, on a purely skill-based level, you know, the ones that really go a long way into the art, none of them use the imagination. At no point in any of my training was I ever told or asked to use my imagination for any purpose. I was never asked to picture anything. It just isn't a part of the instructions for Qigong, and I'm not entirely sure where this sort of modern fad for visualizing things has come from. If we look at what Qigong requires, okay, so there's a phrase where they say the Qi, the Yi, the mind leads the Qi, is the phrase. And people misunderstand that and think we use the imagination to sort of lead it round, but it goes deeper than that. Ultimately you could change that phrase to the quality of your mind will dictate the quality of the Qi within your body. Now the quality that we're trying to develop ultimately is mental stillness, because if the mind can move towards a state of stillness, then it will actually start to generate more energy within the body will function to a higher level. So we lead the Qi by entering mental stillness. From pure mental stillness, which can be a tricky thing to achieve, but if we can achieve pure stillness, then out of pure stillness, pure yin, arises pure yang, and thus pure yang, more qi is generated within the body. We cannot still the mind if the mind is imagining something or visualizing something. It cannot happen. Essentially the mind is distracted by its job. Stillness and emptiness are very, very closely related, and to visualize or imagine something is not an empty mind, right? If you use imagination in your practice, what will happen is you'll start to stimulate the nervous system because of the connection between the brain and the nervous system, so you'll start to get somatic reactions taking place. But all of these were within classical Qigong teachings considered to be false teachings or deviant paths. The imagination was not to be used. The quality of the mind is based upon two things. One is absorption of the awareness through the structure of the body into everything that's taking place. That's something sometimes called ting, or listening. They deliberately use the word listening rather than observing because they want to encourage you to move away from visual-based phenomena. If I say observe, that implies the eyes and seeing things. So they talk about listening because it tends to not engage that part of your mind. The other quality that we want is to let go, or song, okay, for things to release, so that things as they arise within the mind can simply be recognized and then let go of. Okay, in order for that to happen, there has to be a spaciousness and a stillness within your awareness that we try to develop. When those two things are in place, absorption of the mind into the body and the ability to release things, then gradually your mind will move towards stillness. The emotional side of your mind will start to fade into the background, temporarily, obviously, during your practice. And then what will happen is the body will start to generate more energy, because that energy, that qi, is not being leaked by your emotions, leaked by mental activity. We only have to look at how much energy is used by the brain compared to the rest of the body to understand just how much qi our mind can start to use up, using sort of classical terminology. If I picture or imagine things, then I will not enter into that process, so you'll never generate any more qi, and what you end up with is an entire generation of qigong practitioners within a style or system that have been given this instruction that are spending all day just sitting there imagining things. I mean, that's not qigong. So another side to this is a lot of the things people are asked to imagine are things that are described by the past masters in alchemy texts. So they'll talk about a white light, for example, that appears in front of the head, or they'll talk about flowers falling from the sky, or whatever, And they talk about these imageries that are very colour-based and animal-based, element-based. And people have used those classical instructions to think that they need to imagine those things, okay? That's not true. The lights and colours they were talking about, the geometric shapes, the patterns within the classical texts and the classical teachings, these aren't instruction of things you're supposed to imagine. They are confirmation of things that will naturally arise from within your practice as a result of abiding in the correct state with your mind during your practice. So if I can move towards stillness and cultivate the body in the right way, then as the qi is generated and the conversion of your consciousness takes place, these things will naturally arise and you will start to perceive them. When they are perceived, ultimately, to ignore them, they're not anything to place any importance upon, but they do serve as kind of signpost markers that you're traveling in the right direction. If you compare this to some other traditions, there's other meditation systems and things that were very much against giving you clear signs of progress, because these were said to be a distraction, or people would start turning them into goals and things like this. Taoism was never like that. It always had very clear signs. If you train this will start to happen. If you train, you'll start to witness this. And in this way, the classical teachings were seen as like a confirmational text on how you were doing in your practice, as a sort of guidance, you know. None of those things will ever be achieved if you're using your imagination for your practice. So for this reason, I don't use any of it. No imagination, no visualization within my teachings at all. It's just not there.